Hey, what's up, everybody? I am just now starting the live feed, and we're going to get the show going here pretty quick. I'm going to let some people tune in and get fired up here to see what we're going to be talking about. But I'm excited for the guest. It is Harris the Third. As he gets set up here, be just a couple minutes before we bring him into the room. But yeah, I actually got to listen to a presentation, or I guess borderline a lecture that he did at Magic Live. If none of you guys have ever been to Magic Live, it's pretty amazing. It's a very simple place to go for magicians that has all kinds of different things going on that they love to do, and something for everybody. One thing that I was actually most impressed with is that there wasn't not all of the speakers or presenters were magicians, and so that kind of threw me off. Admittedly, it was the first time I'd been to Magic Live, and it was definitely a lot of fun. There was creative consultants there from like Adobe, and all the different storytellers and writers and just speakers and things like that. And Harris was one of them that was there, and I'm actually really excited to have him on the show. And one of the things that he released recently is a book called Wonder Switch. I actually have a book ordered, but it's not released until tomorrow. So unfortunately, I won't get to it right away, but looking forward to dig into that. And for those of you who don't know, I'm not much of a reader, regardless of all the fake books behind me. But fortunately, it's an audio book form as well. So definitely check out Amazon and things like that. I'll actually pull that up for you guys now, just so you can see where to go to get that. But yeah, I think it's on Amazon and everywhere like that too. So I'm super excited for that. And but yeah, let's bring him on, and we'll get him going on the show. We'll ask him some questions and just kind of find out the book and the inspiration behind it, and just learn about him and the different things that he has going on. Because like I said, I was highly, highly impressed with his lecture at Magic Live last year. So without further ado, I guess let's just bring Harris right in. Hey, buddy.
How are you?
Got volume. Let's see here. You might be muted.
I am not muted. Can you not hear me?
There we go. I got you now.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for spending some time with me.
Man, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was kind of telling everybody here about my first experience of you was at Magic Live. I don't know if that's just normally a presentation that you give, but it was an amazing presentation. Definitely by far my favorite.
Oh man, thank you so much, man. It's no, that's the first time. In fact, I just sent Stan an email the other day because I got an email from someone. It was like over a year later. They had pre-ordered a copy of my new book and had sent me a follow-up message going, "Can't wait to read your book. I saw you at Magic Live," and just like wrote a whole paragraph about how much that talk meant to them. And so I sent an email note to Stan saying, "Hey, thank you for talking me into giving that talk," because I was pretty on the fence and was not at all expecting it to be that well received. So completely blown away. So thank you for the kind words. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, admittedly, that was my first time at Magic Live. And, I went there expecting to learn and talk about all this great magic stuff and whatever. And I was surprised, I really shouldn't have been, of how many speakers were there that really didn't talk about magic, really, or weren't magicians themselves, but really just had like a creative perspective on magic, or just an inspirational story, kind of like yours. But yeah, every one of them really focused on kind of that emotion of performing magic. And that's really what you kind of spoke on for the most part. And digging a little bit more into it, I listened to like I said, I have your book ordered. It won't be here till tomorrow. But I did go through that first chapter you have on your website, and it's absolutely amazing. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, for everyone listening, if you're like, what first chapter is he talking about? You can just go to thewonderswitch.com. thewonderswitch.com, which is the name of my new book, which I have handily sitting here on my desk. So this was a pre-release copy. These came in last week, I think. So you should get yours anytime, depending on when you ordered it, Travis. But
it looks like
to dig into it. But you can read the first chapter for free on the website.
Yeah, it looks like it was shipped and it's on track to get it tomorrow. So
awesome.
Excited. I'm going to put that website right there in the comments so everybody can see that. Yeah, so I don't know. It looks like we got a few people watching, a handful of people watching, so that's good. So definitely, do your comments, ask your questions and stuff like that. But I kind of want to dig a little bit more into you, man. I want to learn more about you, like kind of your history and your background and what led you to kind of wanting to be that speaker and share your stories as much as you're willing to share, of course.
Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, it's a big question. It's been quite a journey. There wasn't just all of a sudden this moment where I was like, oh, I want to share my story. And I kind of fell into it by accident. In my mid-20s, I got a magic kit for my grandmother when I was 9. So like a lot of kids and maybe even a lot of magicians listening to us talk right now, it started for me when I was a kid. It took probably 2 years for me to finally book my first official show. Got paid $25. It was awesome. I was like, this is it, man. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So fast forward about, I guess, 15 years later, I started traveling around the world performing full-time as a teenager, dropped out of high school to do magic full-time. I ended up getting a diploma. My parents jokingly called it hotel school because I did a whole program, but I was in a hotel room constantly. And so, yeah. And I don't know how much of my story you want to get into, but lots of ups and downs over the course of that career. And in my mid-20s, I had hit rock bottom after some bad decisions in my early 20s. And by my mid-20s, I was just still kind of traveling around, trying to make sense of the world and trying to figure out what life was all about. And I was at this school in Michigan doing a school assembly program. And I really wasn't even that excited about the school. What I was there for is to promote the big show, like the big show at the theater later that night.
Right. Yeah.
And so anytime I came to town a few days early, we would always go hit up some schools and try to sell tickets to the shows. And every now and then the principals or school leaders would let us come in and do a full show, and they would turn it into an assembly instead of me just hitting up, the cafeteria with a deck of cards or something. And so I walk in for this assembly. All the students are filing in, coming up, sitting in the bleachers. Already it's like, oh, this is gonna be awful. Like, audience is up above you. I'm down on the gym floor. The sound system is not great. The principal walks in, is like, hey, you're the magician. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, well, you know how to trick people, right? And I was like, I mean, what do you say to that, right? What magicians do. He goes, why don't you go out there and teach those students how they're getting tricked and making the choices that they were making? And I was like, dude, I don't think I'm what you think I am. I'm not here to be a motivational speaker. I don't know anything about the choices they're making. He's like, well, they're bullying people. A lot of them are addicted to things. Like, he starts listing off all this stuff. And then he just goes out and introduces me. So I'm like, I don't know what to do. I go out, I do my set. I finish with a straight jacket escape. And at the end, I look over and he's like, kind of giving me a thumbs up. Like I have a few minutes left to say some inspiring words. And man, I just held up my straitjacket and I was like, hey, I don't know what this straitjacket represents to you guys. I don't know what it felt like to watch me struggle to get out of this thing. If you're like, that looked really hard, it's because it was. Straitjackets are not easy to escape from. And I've had a lot of straitjackets in my lifetime. And honestly, for one of the first times, I opened up and it was just really raw and real with my audience about my own struggles, and instead of trying to make it look like I had my act together and that my life was perfect and, covering the part of the story where I'd made $1 million doing magic shows by 21 and, I had a chance to hang out with celebrities and build a fancy house and drive expensive cars. I told the rest of the story, which was going bankrupt by 22 and my life falling apart and all the addictions that I struggled with as a teenager and some of the abuse that was a part of my childhood. And was just I try to be as vulnerable as possible, and finish by saying, I don't know what your straitjacket is. I just know that we all have one. And I want you to know there's always hope. And I don't know if you've ever done a bad show. I've done lots of bad shows.
Yes.
And so at the end of the bad show, I did what every performer does when they have a bad night or a bad day or whatever. I start beating myself up inside my head, right? The inner critic kicks in and it's like, that was awful. What were you thinking? That was like the worst presentation you've ever given. And all the students are like filing out. And then there is this girl still sitting up in the bleachers. And she starts walking down towards me. Almost everyone else had already left. And she is bawling, like tears running down her cheeks. And she's like, "Hey, Harris, I have something for you." I'm like, "Okay." She said, "Hold out your hands." I held up my hands like this. She reaches into her pocket. She pulls out her hand and she drops a razor blade into my hand and said, "That's my straitjacket. And I don't want it anymore. And you're the first person to ever make me feel like there's hope." And I remember there was this teacher, someone came around the corner. It was an adult. It was like, "Hey guys, it's time to go back to class." She turned and walked away before I even had a chance to have a conversation with her. And I never even got her name, but I remember as she turned and walked away, I have this like memory. It's like a video and burned into my head of her sticking her hands inside of her pockets as she walked away. And I saw the scars up and down her wrists on both arms.
Yeah.
And I was like, why would someone do something like that? I'd never come in contact with that type of behavior before, because I was so insulated in my own little bubble of just traveling around from city to city doing magic. And man, it wrecked me. And I became obsessed with trying to figure out why someone would do that. And what I discovered is that Steve Jobs was right. You know, his famous quote, "The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller." And as I dissected the power that storytellers have to introduce narratives into the world that drive everything from consumers' buying decisions to who we vote for to how people think and see themselves in the mirror, I realized, gosh, like, man, with that kind of power comes great responsibility. And then it dawned on me, whoa, that's what I was doing that day. For a moment, it wasn't about the magic. It was about the story that I was telling. And the magic just made that story more compelling. And so I walked away from that experience realizing I'm not really a magician, and that you're not really a magician, that we're all really storytellers who happen to do magic tricks. And that created this huge shift in how I approach my craft and my career. So that was a long answer, but hopefully it answers your question.
No, that is great. That is spot on. And I remember a little bit of that story from Magic Live, and that was one of them that definitely struck a chord. And going into a lecture like that, we don't ever know what to expect. And when you just hit everybody in the face with some feels, man, like you can tell everybody in the room like connected instantly with that. And I think a lot of the people in the room kind of got a new purpose, at least hopefully for a little while. And I don't know how long that lasts with anybody when they leave, but for me, it's definitely stuck with me for the entire year. So that's great.
Yeah, thanks, man. We have so much potential as performers to do that. And I think a lot of people, they hear stories like that and they're like, that's not really the type of magician that I am. I'm not like do a magic trick and then share a little message or tell a little story. I just like doing strong magic. And I think what a lot of performers fail to understand is that you can't not tell a story, because everything is a story. Like, we as human beings, this is a lot of what the book is about, that we as human beings are storytelling creatures, that every single human being on the planet walks around all day long, and in every single thing that they experience, they think in story, they think in narrative, they tell themselves stories about what they're experiencing in order to make sense of the world and the human experience. We do this so often that even when we go to bed at night and physically sleep, our brains stay up all night long telling ourselves more stories. And so a lot of performers can say, I'm not really a storyteller, but every single person in the audience is going to walk away from the performance of that show telling themselves a story about what they think you were trying to express and communicate to them. And so if they're going to tell themselves a story about who you are, you might as well be intentional about crafting and taking some agency over the story that you want to tell them. And so if you can't not tell stories, that means every performer is a storyteller. And I think we all need to rise to the occasion of realizing this is not just about tricking people. It doesn't matter what you're trying to communicate through your story. It just matters that you care about the one that you're telling.
Right. Yeah. No, I definitely agree for sure. And I think there's a lot of kind of like that moment you went through where you had to come up with that one moment where you just became vulnerable to the audience. I think it's important that everybody goes through that, because a lot of people will get up on stage, and I've even been to like some speakers and stuff where, I mean, it just feels like they're reading cue cards. But as soon as you really express yourself and open up, it doesn't matter the story that you have. Like, people will know it's real and they will connect with it one way or another.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there's a lot of people who feel uncomfortable with what we're talking about, but yet if they were having dinner, sitting around a table with a group of friends, and you're like, hey, Travis, tell them about that one time when you whatever, fill in the blank, right? Like you wouldn't go grab your note cards because that's a story that you lived and experienced. And okay, you might feel the temptation to be like, well, I want to make the story super compelling. And so I want to think it out and have some notes about how I want to tell it. While that is possible for you to tell a more compelling story by making it better and thinking through it, you don't have to have those cards to just tell a story and be yourself in the process. And so my hope is that the magic community becomes more and more filled with performers who are willing to tell stories on stage with vulnerability the way they would tell and exchange stories while sitting around a table having dinner with friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I teach some magic classes here and stuff too in my shop. And one of the things, like, I tell the kids, because, you know, they just want to kind of go through the motion with their tricks. I'm like, make it your own. Absolutely make it your own trick. And I've asked them specifically, even if I'm doing a simple sponge ball trick, I'm like, what is your favorite thing in the world? And one kid was like, Pokemon. So I'm like, great. I want you to imagine these are little Pokeballs. Like, tell your favorite Poke story. Like, that's it. Do the whole thing with that. Yeah. And instantly he's like, oh, I could talk about this and this. And I'm like, exactly. Like, find that thing that you're passionate about, Pokemon or whatever. Like, just find it and run with it. Make it your own.
Totally. You know what I think a lot of magicians, they have pushback against this idea of storytelling with their magic. What that does is it makes the magic stronger. And they walk away talking about you as a performer instead of how the trick worked. So Darren Brown, I'm totally flaking on the name of his book. He's got multiple books out, but in one of his books, he talked a lot about how, you know, when you perform a piece of magic for someone, to give them an explanation, regardless of whether it's the real one, about how you are accomplishing what you're accomplishing. And what that does, it takes the emphasis off the workings of the trick and onto your talent as a performer. And I think the greatest way to do that is with storytelling, because if people like story, what the neuroscience around storytelling does is it shows that stories sort of hijack the human brain. And it's really hard to look away from a story that's unfolding because the human imagination is constantly saying, hey, what happens next? What happens next in this story? And so if you're going, now we're going to do this, now we're going to do this, that's not a compelling story. But if you all of a sudden are talking about Pokeballs and you're injecting your own passion into it, well, now it has a narrative and people are more immersed in that narrative, and the brain has an it's easier for the human brain to follow attention and be invested in what you're talking about. And now they're invested in the story. The magic just happens to be happening along the way. And so they still walk away and wonder, going, man, I wonder how he did that. They had this emotional connection with you as a performer, which elevates the magic, makes it stronger, and leaves them with a connection with you instead of only the trick.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most important things, like get people to forget about it's a trick and just purely enjoy the moment. And I think that's where you find all these people saying, you know, they've had hecklers in the audiences, they've had all this stuff. I think it's just because, and, you know, I think 90% of it's on the performer almost always, because, you know, you could make something disappear, but why does the audience care? I mean, you have to get that connection with them. So I see we do have a question.
Why did they care?
Yeah, like, cool. So what? Like, it's gone. So we do have this one here. Are there any books or resources that you have used or recommend to craft a story or make it more interesting or compelling?
Oh man, there's so many. If you want to go deep into this, there's so many amazing books out there on storytelling. If you're like, give me something light, quick, easy to read. I would recommend, I know I'm biased, obviously, but The Wonder Switch, my new book, comes out tomorrow. And this is, while it is a book about wonder, it is really a book about storytelling and the stories we tell ourselves. But in there, there is basically a diagram that I created called the transformation map. And it's a really good tool to sort of use as a template for how to tell and craft a compelling story. And if you cover every step that's in the transformation map and look at that as a lens or a way of sharing your own story on stage or in your performances, I think that's a great place to start. If you want to look specifically at the craft of storytelling, I think a really good, easy book to start with is my friend Matthew Lunn's book. His last name is Luhn. I think it's called The Best Story Wins. He was the story supervisor at Pixar for over 20 years. He worked on the very first Toy Story film and then all the way through like the golden days of Pixar.
Very cool.
Yeah, from Ratatouille to Up, as far as like all those films. And it's really thin. It's a really easy read, and it's a really practical way of just improving your craft of storytelling overall.
Very cool. So while you had your book out, let's talk a little bit about the book. Like, so what was kind of your inspiration? Like when did you start actually saying this is what I want to write?
This started about 2 years ago. I started in a lot of the keynotes that I was giving. A lot of the companies that I work with were asking me to come in and talk about how to think creatively. That was in response to them attending a conference that I was producing called Story, which I still produce. We just finished up our 5th year, virtually, of course. And
Yeah.
when I started doing Story Conference, all these amazing companies started coming. Apple started sending creative directors. We had Disney Imagineers start popping up, designers from Google, people from Cirque du Soleil, National Geographic. It's crazy. And as a result of curating that conference and leading that community of storytellers, some of those companies started coming going, how is this conference is very creatively produced and it's very immersive. And I'm noticing that it's not just about the content that's delivered from stage, but you were quite literally immersing us in a story while we are having conversations about storytelling from the speakers. How is it that you do that? And so I tried to dissect my own creative process, and because I wasn't able to answer the question, I was like, I don't know why it's so effective. I'm just kind of doing it. It's kind of like learning the secret to a magic trick, because you asked your mentor, how does this trick work? And they gave you the secret, and then you practice it, and now you can do it, but you don't understand why. But why does that principle work? So it's easy to learn the French drop without understanding the psychology behind why people think that the coin is in the other hand. In fact,
Right.
Total side note, if I have any encouragement for magicians, it's that stop caring as much about how magic tricks work and start understanding why magic tricks work. And what you will discover is that these universal principles of deception, or if you want a synonym that sounds a little bit less negative, these universal principles of psychology and persuasion are applicable to so many other facets of life outside of magic. And so as I started to dissect my own process and going, why is Story Conference so effective? Why are people having these types of transformational experiences while in attendance? I realized it came back to something that was really at the intersection of my two sides of my work around the subject of wonder as a magician, and then my work around the subject of story as a storyteller. And so these companies said, hey, come give a talk on that, whatever that creative process is. And that's when I decided to start using the metaphor of a switch. It's the best metaphor that I know of to explain what a state of wonder and entering into it feels like. Because when wonder gets crushed, it's like someone turns out the lights. Not only does it blind you and keeps you from being able to see the possibility around you, the wonder switch being on or off also toggles how you use your imagination. And when you're sitting in the dark side of our imagination kicks in, and we start misusing our imagination. So in the book, I talk a lot about how worry is a misuse of imagination, because to look at the future, and really your imagination is just a flight simulator, sort of virtual reality tool for the future. Your imagination is always filling in the blank, what if, or what happens next in this story. And it's fast forwarding in the story subconsciously, making a decision about what it sees in the future, and then sending it back to you to send a signal to your nervous system on whether you should be afraid or scared or not. And so all these things that we worry about are rooted in futuristic storytelling going on inside of our imagination. And I think that worry is a misuse of imagination. And so when the wonder switch gets turned off and the lights go out, it affects all these things about how our brain works and the stories that we tell ourselves. Likewise, turning the wonder switch back on, it's like turning on the lights, and it permits us to believe in a story that we have yet to see. And so wonder helps you move from thinking that seeing is believing, and this cynical mindset of like, oh, I'll believe that when I see it. Seeing is believing to believing is seeing. Helps you understand that what you believe has the power to change what you see. And sometimes you have to believe in something or the possibility of something before you can actually create it or see it. So that's really how it began 2 years ago. And here we are finally with the book coming out tomorrow. It's been quite a ride.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I was reading, I mean, obviously a little bit about that map and all the other stuff that you have in there. So like, what is kind of the progression from beginning to end of the book? Like, what can people hope to take out of that?
Yeah, sure.
I know one thing that I definitely look forward to is not how to just learn to flip that switch, but how to continue to carry that on. It's not Not just like, yep, this is it, you're done. But how to continue with that mindset.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. The transformation map that I referenced earlier was my attempt to map out the journey back to wonder. Like, how do we reawaken wonder and turn the wonder switch back on? And what comes with that? What happens along the way? And I was struggling because I was basically drawing a timeline. And along that straight line, I was like, but what comes before the first dot on the timeline? And then it just dawned on me one day to take the two ends of the timeline and pull them around in a circle. Because the reality is the transformation map is a circle, because we come into this world wide-eyed, believing in magic, and our wonder is wide awake, and the wonder switch is completely turned on, right? And so if the wonder switch comes on, that means that wonder is our natural state. And then something in our childhood turns that wonder switch off. And then we end up in some pretty dark places if we're not careful, end up getting stuck in complacency, ruled by worry, become very cynical and jaded. And we need an inciting incident to turn the wonder switch back on, to start our journey back to wonder. And so because it's in a circle, well, at any time, 2020 was a great example of that. Yeah. On either side of the transformation map in the book are inciting incidents. There can be positive inciting incidents that completely transform our lives and lead us back to wonder, or negative inciting incidents that sort of suck us back down in the bottom half of the transformation map and crush our wonder. 2020 was a negative inciting incident that a lot of people have been deeply affected by, and it has sucked. But that doesn't mean that we can't find our way back to wonder. And it doesn't mean that wonder can't give us permission to believe in the possibility of a better story. But we have to do some work along the way. And so, yes, it is a circle, and the switch can go on, off, on throughout our entire lives. And the reality is it's probably a dimmer switch, because sometimes, even though the wonder switch may never get fully off, there are times that it can certainly start to fade away, and we've got to learn to fade it back up. But to answer your original question about kind of the process of the entire book, it kind of starts there. It helps people understand what is the wonder switch? What does it permit? What does life look like if the wonder switch is turned on? And what kind of opportunities does it bring you? Here's what the future has the potential to look like. But unfortunately, most of us had our wonder switch turned off. What turns it off? Now, that requires some pretty radical self-inquiry and some digging into the parts of your story. Because as I said earlier, if wonder is your natural state, that means to get back to a state of wonder doesn't mean you have to go find something that you've never had. It's more about going and searching for something, and it's less about going and searching for something, I should say, and more about taking something that's getting in the way, a blockage, and removing it, about returning back to your true, authentic self. It's less about becoming something that you're currently not, and more about unbecoming the thing that was never really you to begin with, right? Yeah. And so that's what chapter 2 is about. And then we kind of get into how we are storytelling creatures, that as human beings, we think in story, that narrative is the operating system of our brains, what that means for how we are led to tell ourselves stories that aren't true. Once we address some of those lies and the ways that we get cleverly deceived, we jump into the neuroscience of awe and wonder, which is crazy fascinating to me. There's a lot of new studies out of UC Berkeley. They're doing a great job at studying positive awe states, which I associate with wonder, because there are negative awe states. Awe is the root word for both awful and the word awesome, right? So you can be in awe of something and it have a negative impact on you, but you can also be in awe of something and it change everything for you. So positive awe states I associate with a state of wonder. And there's a bunch of new studies out from them at UC Berkeley that are showing us just how wired we are for wonder, that wonder and experiences in positive awe states can shift the physiology in your body, can do things like decrease chronic inflammation in your body. It can create this openness to other people's stories. The presence of awe can increase your empathy and give you the ability to connect with other people on a heart level. If you think about that through the lens of being magicians, I mean, that's pretty crazy, because our ability to succeed as performers is only equal to our ability to connect with the audience. And there are too many people failing to connect with their audiences simply because they don't have empathy. And they don't have empathy because they have no room for wonder. And how ironic is that magicians, like the community, the people of this incredible art form who have the greatest potential in the world to awaken the wonder and turn the wonder switches on of others, have become so cynical that we have lost our wonder as a community, and that is decreasing our empathy and pushing against our own ability to connect with is what we were hoping to do to begin with.
Right.
Crazy. So once we get into neuroscience, then we start to find our way back to wonder over the course of a couple chapters. I talk about the difference between a limiting mindset and a wonder mindset. That's a really practical chapter about what are the key components of a wonder mindset and how do we change the habits in our lives around that. We get into how to create an environment that allows your wonder to be sustained, because it's one thing for you to read a book or to create a life experience that awakens your wonder. But after you find your way back to wonder, to come home or to go to the office and that wonder get crushed again because the environment around you doesn't permit that wonder to be sustained, because your environment shapes your life. And we are products of our environment. So there's a whole chapter in there about how to create your own wonderland. And then we finish on what it looks like to live a life of curiosity. And in my opinion, curiosity is wonder in action. So if wonder is a state, if it's a noun, then once it becomes a verb, once you're in a state of wonder, you become curious. And all of the science that supports curiosity being linked with creativity and innovative thought, you can't have that stuff without wonder, because it lays the foundation for all of it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm definitely looking forward to it. What would you say to those people? Because I know it's 100% not true, but just hearing it from you too. There's so many people out there that just say they don't have a story to share. Like they don't have anything worth talking about. And I think it's so hard. And I would love to be able to see those people actually, go through the wonder switch and see how their mindset would change. Like, cause I think that's the people that really, really need to see something like this.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, let me preface it with this. Most of the time, the reason why people say they don't have a story to share is because they are comparing themselves with other people who they think have a really interesting story. Like every single person listening to us talk right now has a 100% success rate at making it through all the things that they've gone through so far. Right.
Yeah.
Like if they're here listening, that means maybe they're not at the end of it yet, but so far, they have a 100% success rate, or they would be still alive working and listening to this video right now. And so to get there has required, for most of us, a series of ups and downs. We just tend to downplay the drama in our story because we assume that we are uninteresting. But yet, if you stop zooming way out and just look at the overall arc of the story you've lived and learn how to zoom in a little bit to a single part of your life, I would start asking your questions like, okay, describe for me the hardest day of your entire life. Tell me a story about a time when it felt like everything was going to fail, and somehow you made it out alive. And
I think it's interesting that you actually start with think about something negative.
Sure.
Because I think that's actually really cool to say like, oh, it's so bad, and this happened. But like you said, you made it. You're still here.
Everything that you have of value to share with your audience, you learn from your difficulties, from your pain, from your failures, from your suffering, not from your success. Success is an awful teacher. Success, there's nothing wrong with experiencing success. But oftentimes, if I look back at the times that I've failed, I learned so much. And when I look at the times that I've succeeded, it was either a direct result of all of the path of failures that preceded it. It's like, oh, we finally succeeded as a result of failures and what we learned from it. Or you tried something and it worked and you're like, well, I guess it worked. Sure, like it feels good, but it didn't teach me very much, right? And so it's because failure is a better teacher than success. And because all of your favorite films and stories are only interesting because of what that character had to overcome. When you look at the difficulty and the pain and the suffering in your story, that is what makes your story rich with meaning, right? And so you are who you are today as a result of those struggles. We just don't want to talk about them because it requires vulnerability. It requires curiosity, right? Brené Brown, who's done so much amazing work around the subject of shame, she says, choosing to be curious is choosing to be vulnerable because it requires us to surrender to uncertainty. Like when you walk on stage and tell a story about a struggle in your life and what you learned from it, you are choosing to be curious. You're allowing your curiosity to be greater than your fear because you are choosing to be vulnerable. You are surrendering to uncertainty because you don't know how people are going to respond to it. But the majority of the time, people respond with, "Oh man, me too," or "I can totally relate to that struggle. I've been there as well. Thank you so much for sharing with me." And like I talked about in that talk at Magic Live, Maya Angelou famously said that people will always forget what they see you do, even amazing magic tricks. We don't want to accept it, but that is the truth. People will forget what they see you do. They will even forget what they heard you say, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Which means if you're going to say something to someone and perform something visually for someone, and you want what they see and what they heard to be unforgettable, you have to make them feel something. And the greatest way to make someone feel something is to tell them a story with vulnerability about an experience that you've had in your life, and that will make your magic so much more unforgettable.
Yeah. And, like even looking at it, thinking about those negative stories that you'd started with there, it makes me think of not politics or anything like that, but even like on news, when they just share like the negative things going on in the world, like I wonder what that watching the news would be like if they just switched it on a high note, like they ended every negative story, like,
yeah,
but this happened. And I think even when John Krasinski did just like positive things going on in the world, like that got so much traction.
Yep.
I think it's just because nobody was doing that. Like nobody was talking about the good things going on in the world as much as he was. And I mean, it helps to be a celebrity and all, and just generally entertaining. But yeah, that was refreshing just to see something just positive, just all the way through.
No doubt, no doubt. And the science behind that shows that positivity is empowering, and it gives people permission to believe, to write and live their own better story. But if you don't want someone to write their own story and you want to control them and write the story for them, positivity is not the motivator that you would choose, because fear is a much more powerful motivator for control. And so while we as human beings would have a healthier, better, brighter world and society with the Krasinski approach, or my friend Brandon Harvey, who he has something that he releases called the Good Newspaper. And it's literally a monthly newspaper you can subscribe to, and it's filled with nothing but good news. And he's always talking about how, if you watch the news, it feels like the world is in a pretty dark place. But if you read the positive news and all the statistics, the world is getting better and better and better each year. Like every negative stat that we measure in humanity is getting better. But we don't hear it, and you wouldn't think about it because of the negativity of the news. But yet that is all driven from a sense of control. And I start sounding like a conspiracy theorist to a lot of people.
But it's true though.
Yeah, sometimes it's not as much like direct political propaganda, although there's certainly an abundance of that. But sometimes it's as simple as, hey, we have commercials we need to sell and we need to support our advertisers. And the best way to control you as a viewer to ensure we keep you on the hook is through fear. And so regardless of it's, we want you to vote for this person, or we need you to buy this thing, and the most powerful motivator for writing someone's story or getting them to submit to letting you do the writing of their story is through fear. I feel like we could do a lot better than that. That's why part of the reason I wrote this book. I feel like if we can awaken people's wonder, it gives them permission to take back that power, to take back the creative agency over their own stories.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. Now I seen on your website, and I honestly didn't even know this until I originally reached out to you. You do like a storytellers convention or event of some sort?
Yeah, that was Story Conference that I was talking about earlier. So we just call it Story. Happens every year in September. So we just finished up our 5th one. Awesome. Yeah, we have amazing speakers. We usually have about 1,000 attendees. And it's all about this power that storytellers have. And we have people from every art form imaginable, writing, film, photographers, to performers. It's a handful of magicians who come each year, musicians, and a lot of people who just work in communications and corporate environments and nonprofits and NGOs. It's pretty awesome.
The photos of the stage set alone makes me want to go. It looked really, really cool.
Thanks.
Where does that take place?
Usually in Nashville. We have a symphony hall here in Nashville that we used.
Okay.
This year was virtual.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. And then what was? what was I going to ask you? Something I was looking at on your website. Yeah, so I was going through kind of like reading a little bit about your bio and stuff, and I see you had done like some TED Talks and you doing consulting and your speaking engagements, your master classes, all that good stuff, which I'm looking forward to the master class thing with your book. So that's going to be super cool. How did you actually, I mean, other than your motivation, like how did you get started in being a speaker? Like, cause I mean, I do that a little bit with my performances now, but everybody knows me as an entertainer.
Yeah.
And of course, I end every show with a positive, like that little glimmer. But it's so tough for people to be like, "Oh no, you're not a speaker. You're an entertainer." So that's such a weird like switch for people, and there's that word for people to get that transition on, like to really get your point across that, like you said, everybody is a storyteller, and I think that's true for everybody. I think even if you're a novice in a topic, you probably still have something worthwhile sharing.
Yeah, well, easy answer. I think the biggest mistake that a lot of magicians make is they go, "Oh, like I heard speaking is really lucrative," or "I just want to become more of a speaker. So like, what does the market want, or what are people asking for?" And it's just the wrong approach. The greatest way to become a speaker is to have something to say. And the greatest way to realize that you have something to say is to dig into your story and figure out what you're passionate about. And I have a friend, Jim Kruger, who used to be one of the creative directors at Marvel. We did a writing workshop with him a few years ago now with Story, or the community that we were just talking about a second ago. And in the workshop, he went around the room, asked people what their top 10 favorite films were, and how it was having them name them off one by one. And it was basically an exercise in finding your creative voice, which I would associate with what you're asking, or my answer to your question, at least, is that you shouldn't just try to become a speaker because you want to get those types of bookings or whatever. But if you want to find and figure out what your message is, you got to find your creative voice. And in helping these people find their creative voice, he was asking them what their top 10 films were. And he was going through them all. What they realized is that in every single one of those films, there was a villain that was fighting against something in the world that correlated with the story, the real story that they had lived as a human being. And there was something about that story and the way a hero in that story overcame that villain that resonated with them. Sometimes it was something from their childhood. Sometimes it was something difficult they experienced as an adult. And you can very quickly see like, oh, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I see in the world that's broken that I would love to fix. I was just coaching a friend the other night. You can't see it, but the couch that's on the other side of this camera. And he's like, I'm trying to figure out my story, man. I'm like, what makes you angry? What to you like is associated with pain? He's like, he's a travel agent. And he's like, I just can't stand when there's a lack of excellence in someone's experience, with their family on vacation. A lot of people, they can't afford to go on very many vacations. And when they finally get to go on one, when that experience has lacked excellence and professionalism, and when every detail has been paid attention to, so that there's magic associated with it and amazing memories for the family. And I was like, well, tell me about that. And, you dig into his story, and he has a bunch of stories from his childhood of not being able to have those experiences together as a family, and all that got in the way. And you can see the villains that destroyed the vacations. And so now subconsciously, he's been fighting those villains through his work. And so I would say it's a similar process. You got to find your creative voice and figure out what is it that you want to say to the world? What keeps you up at night? What do you see in the world that's broken? How can you help restore order among that brokenness by sharing a piece of your own story and how you restored order among the brokenness in your own life? And the more you do that, and the more you tell that story, the more people are going to take a step back and go, oh, he's a speaker, not because he called himself one. He or she is a speaker because she had something to say. And she did a great job saying it.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So what do you have coming up? Like anything? I know the book was a big release for you, so that's awesome. But
yeah, we have the masterclass coming up. I know you mentioned that. The Wonder Mindset Masterclass. It's basically an online course. We're going to film it live over the course of 6 weeks. But these 6 modules will be available in the recording. So we're going to start selling that. It's $297 for the full course. However, you can get it for free with a pre-order copy of the book. And so that is available until tomorrow night at midnight. So Tuesday, technically, I guess Wednesday morning, Tuesday night at midnight is your last chance to claim that. So again, the Wonder Mindset Masterclass, we're going to film it over the course of 6 weeks. So you can participate live, or you'll have access to the recordings, but you get it for free instead of paying almost $300 for it by just pre-ordering a copy of the Wonder Switch. And then you just go to thewonderswitch.com. There's a little button that says claim my free bonus. You click on that button, type in your name, email, and then your receipt information. And somehow software does all the work and puts you in the lineup.
It worked for me. It was pretty cool. I'm like, how's that work? And then, it went right through. So that was awesome.
Yeah. So, awesome.
Very, very cool. One of the groups that I'm a part of, I'm vice president, I'm broadcasting to, is called Our Growth Project. So basically, we're kind of all about arts, education, and entertainment for youth and different things like that, providing them a platform for voice and then kind of nurturing their passions a little bit. Outside of the whole magic thing, just somebody trying to chase their dream of whatever it is they're passionate about. Like, what do you have to say to that person? Like, if you could instill one piece of knowledge, like, what would that be?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing about Wonder, and I'm going to start sounding like a broken record, and that is intentional because I'm passionate about people understanding the role and power that Wonder has in their lives. And 2020 has hijacked a lot of stories and crushed a lot of wonder. Wonder gives you permission to believe in what you have yet to see. And so we all become so jaded, and if we get to the point where we're just like, oh, wonder, I'll believe in that when I see it. Or like, oh, you're telling me this is possible in my story? You're telling me to have more passion? Look, but really the root of passion means willingness to suffer. So it's like, well, we got to be willing to suffer for something. But in all the suffering that's taking place this year for so many as we pursue our passions, we have to hold on to our own sense of wonder. And that wonder is compelling. It gives us permission to believe in a story that we have yet to see, because what we believe has the power to change what we see. Now, when I say that, people roll their eyes, right? Because again, of that cynicism, they're like, oh, this is like that new age woo-woo. Like, if I just believe in it, it's like The Secret, the law of attraction, attracted to me. No, that's garbage, right? You still have to put in the work. But like, think about it. We're not open to a new story because we think there's not a new story that could possibly be better than the one we're in. So we all want to pick up the remote and rewind right now. We want to press the rewind button and go back to 2019 because we don't like 2020 and we don't think there's something better in the future that could be better than what we had because we were comfortable, many of us, with what we had. So wonder gives us permission to go, yeah, but what if there's something better? And what if this year is a gift by way of shaping me and molding me into the type of person that could only walk and step into the type of story that's coming in 2021? And I'm using year numbers as markers, but it doesn't have to be that way, right?
Yeah.
And so when I say believing is seeing, what I mean is that if you go back to that girl in the state of Michigan, in that school that I was speaking in at the beginning of our conversation, she had believed a bunch of stuff that wasn't true. Someone sold her some lies. She didn't have a good relationship with a family that wasn't doing a great job of caring about her. She was getting bullied and picked on at school, made her feel like she wasn't enough, that she didn't have what it takes. So she believed lies. When she stood in front of the mirror, what she believed was changing the reflection of the person that she was seeing. So if I were standing next to her, what I would say is, I see someone who is smart, who is pretty, who has what it takes to succeed, who's learning and growing, who has the power to get through this, who's being brave, right? But that's not what she saw in the mirror. She saw someone who was stupid, fat, ugly, dumb, didn't have what it takes, might as well go ahead and hang up her hat right now and call it quits, right? Yeah. Two people, eyes, were seeing two completely different perceptions in the mirror, right? That's because what I believe was changing what I saw, and what she believed was changing what she saw. And so we have to do this radical self-inquiry into ourselves. We have to look in the mirror and get real about what it is that we believe to be true about who we are and how the world works. And we have to change those belief systems. And wonder is the foundation. The presence of wonder is what gives us permission to believe in a new possibility of a new story. And for those who are like, I didn't just choose to believe anything. Like, everything that you believe right now is something that at one point you just decided was true based on something that someone told you or the evidence that you saw. But we know as magicians that we can be easily deceived and distracted. Yeah. So we have to examine those beliefs and choose to believe something different. And that choosing becomes a lot easier when we are living and working in a state of wonder. So to get back to that state of wonder and turn the wonder switch back on requires some work. I had to write a book with over 55,000 words because it can't be summed up in a simple, pithy statement. But that's my hope for everyone listening in.
That's awesome, man. I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me. I won't keep you hardly any longer here. Like I said, I just want to show my gratitude for what you did at Magic Live. It probably changed the performance and mindset of many magicians out there, the same as you did for that girl in Michigan and hopefully a lot others in the near future. So thank you for spending some time sharing your story. And I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I've had a repeat of that experience with that young lady in Michigan hundreds, if not thousands of times now. And it was all because I own the fact that I wasn't a magician, that I am a storyteller who happens to do magic tricks. And that is everyone listening in. And you have a story. So if you're listening to this and you're just like, this doesn't apply to me, I'm telling you guys, you have a story and your story matters. And so share it. And as you do, you will find that there is beauty in no longer trying to be like Luke Skywalker, this cool, powerful magician. It's so much more fun to be Yoda, the guide. And you don't have to be the hero in the audience's story. You can be their guide and help people in your audience rise up and be the hero of their own story. And that will pay you back in dividends. It adds so much meaning and purpose to your life and to your career as a magician. So thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I hope this has been inspiring to you guys.
It has been. It's exactly what I was looking for. So thank you very much. You have a good night. Stay safe. And, hopefully year continues to get better.
Will do. Thanks, Travis. See you soon.
Yeah, thank you.